House of the Dragon, Season 1, Episode 10, is called The Black Queen, who is of course Rhaenyra Targaryen, first of her name, etc., etc. It's the last episode of Season 1, and as the title suggests, while last episode was about the Greens and their reaction to Viserys' death, this episode is about the Blacks. Not just Rhaenyra, but all those around her, and how they react to events in King's Landing. The episode begins with a short scene with Rhaenyra and her second son Luke. I'll come back round to that later. It's Rhaenys, who eliminated a whole bunch of people last episode, that brings the news to Dragonstone, fleeing King's Landing on her dragon, demanding an immediate audience with Rhaenyra and Daemon. Rhaenys gets straight to the point. Viserys is dead. Aegon has been crowned in the dragon pit in front of the small folk. Rhaenyra and Daemon get the point immediately. By acting so fast, the Greens have taken control of the public relations war, as well as having control of the capital for several years. As Otto will mention later, the symbols of kingship, the Iron Throne, the sword Blackfire, and so on. Rhaenyra and Daemon have questions that Rhaenys can't really answer, like how Viserys died, like why she didn't turn the Hightowers into crispy bacon at the coronation, and whether she will actually, finally, declare support for Rhaenyra. Rhaenys still says it's up to her husband. I like the slightly frantic air to this scene, how they are all kind of on the same side, but emotionally they've been thrown into a tailspin. The momentum of events is a bit too much for them. Rhaenys is experienced enough to see this and knows that now is not the moment for an emotional declaration of support, because the news that Daemon's brother, Rhaenyra's father, is dead is a moment which will drive a wedge between the two, bringing up old feelings and old dreams for Daemon in particular. The first problem is Rhaenyra is pregnant, and the shock of what's happened sends her into a premature labour. While she struggles with this, she obviously can't make any political or military decisions, and demands that nothing is done until she delivers her child, as she specifically tells Jace and Luke when telling them about their grandfather's death. This leaves Daemon temporarily in charge, and we know plenty about Daemon by now. He's not going to be interested in just sitting on his hands and waiting for Rhaenyra, for someone else, for anyone else to be ready to take charge. Whether or not anyone else has any instructions, he gathers the other senior men on the island, and first he discusses the defence of Dragonstone itself, which is fair enough, I think. He specifically mentions small ships as a particular threat, presumably worried about assassinations, and rightfully so, seeing as we know this was Otto's plan. Once the security of the island has been set, he moves outwards in terms of geography and timeline, looking to secure allies. First, the minor lords around the Crownlands, then moving further afield to think about the Tullys in the Riverlands. By this point, Jacaerys has arrived at the meeting, freshly informed of his status as heir to the throne, and of his mother's wish to hold off on the war planning. He's like, "Hold your horses there, Daemon. Mum wants us to wait for her." And Daemon could not care less, and neither ultimately could anyone else in the room. Daemon repeats his instructions to send ravens to the lords already mentioned, and after a brief pause, everyone decides they're going to ignore Jace and just do what Daemon says. Rhaenyra's labour goes badly, and the baby is stillborn. We see husband and wife and everyone else together again at the funeral, mourning the death of their daughter. As they stand there, one of the Kingsguard twins arrives, the one who is particularly disgusted with the idea of Aegon being crowned king. He brings with him the crown of Viserys. Daemon walks forward and Eric kneels down in front of him, holds the crown out to him, says he believes Rhaenyra should be the queen, and swears loyalty to her. Daemon takes the crown and studies it. We get this shot of him in the background with the crown in focus. It's almost like Gollum studying the One Ring at the crack of Mount Doom. But Daemon isn't happy. What is he thinking here? Once upon a time, of course, Daemon had ambitions of being king himself. Back in the early episodes, it was Daemon on Dragonstone, ignoring his brother's instructions like he's just ignored Rhaenyra's. He's not forgotten those days. This is something he's wanted for much of his life, like he wanted Rhaenyra for a long time before he actually ended up in a relationship with her. This could be the culminating moment of everything he believes he deserves. Or does he still believe he deserves it? After all, This isn't the first time he's managed to get his hands on the crown, at least in a physical sense. Just 2 or 3 days before, he helped his brother walk to the throne and placed the crown back on his head. After a pause, he does the same for his wife, for his brother's child, places the crown on her head, and kneels. Everyone kneels, except for Rhaenys. With the funeral out of the way, Rhaenyra is ready to plan her next steps. One of my favourite things about House of the Dragon is the map in Dragonstone, which is called the Painted Table. I love the design. The fire underneath is a great contrast to the black of the table itself. It's the centrepiece of the room, and the main players are gathered around as the Black Queen re-enters and Daemon announces her, Rhaenyra first of her name, etc., etc., and addresses her as Your Grace. Daemon's voice is a little tight here, perhaps. There's a bit of tension in there, as though it hurts him to have to say the words, maybe, as though he's having some regrets, perhaps. Here we see the Black faction starting to plan the war. We got a shortened version of this for the Green episode, but it was quite short due to the fact that their candidate for king had gone missing in the bowels of King's Landing. The Black version of this conversation is more detailed, ultimately underscored by the difference in attitude and temperament between the Queen and her consort. The conversation starts off with the basics. Daemon says they can't conquest anything. There may be some commanders in the City Watch who are still loyal to him, and there's a handful of lords in the Crown Lands who are on their side. He moves on quickly to the larger houses they need to secure. Last episode, the Greens mentioned the Baratheons. Daemon name-checks them as well, along with the Vale, the Tullys and the Starks. Driftmark is very much in the maybe camp. The Lannisters are considered as enemies. They identify the Riverlands, and the Tullys are crucial if they wish to gain victory. That's how they see the war in terms of conventional forces. The conversation moves on to Daemon's favourite thing, dragons. The Greens, he says, have 3 or maybe 4. I guess these are the dragons that belong to Alicent's children. The 4th one, I suppose, could be Helaena, who doesn't seem interested in taking part in the war, or he could be referring to Daemon, Alicent's child who lives with the Hightowers in Oldtown. In contrast, he says, the Blacks have access to 13 dragons and numerous eggs. This number of 13 is a bit of a stretch. Let's break it down. To begin with, he says, Daemon has Caraxes, Rhaenyra has Syrax, and Rhaenys has Meleys. Already his argument is on shaky ground, as Rhaenys, as she is at pains to point out, has not yet declared for a faction. Next, Rhaenyra's sons. Again, I think Daemon weakens his argument. Yes, Jace is basically an adult, but Luke is not really. He has some attitude problems we'll come to later. Joffrey is absolutely still a child. Daemon's own daughter, Baela, has Moondancer, and then he moves on to the unclaimed dragons. Seasmoke, Vermithor, Silverwing. Seasmoke, which used to be Laenor's dragon, Vermithor, last ridden by King Jaehaerys, Rhaenyra's great-grandfather, so hasn't been ridden in about 30 years, and Silverwing, who also hasn't been ridden for at least 3 decades. Then there's 3 unclaimed wild dragons. Rhaenyra has doubt, reasonable doubt, and asks a pertinent question. Who's going to ride all these unclaimed dragons? But Daemon's not in the mood for taking questions and ignores her. He moves on to how he's going to use them. He proposes gathering an army in the Riverlands, along with the dragons, surrounding King's Landing and taking the city. Presumably, this is where the Tullys, mentioned earlier, come into his plan. Daemon's getting quite worked up, and you can hear the excitement in his voice when they get news of a fresh threat, a boat approaching Dragonstone, decorated with a 3-headed green dragon, the symbol of the Hightower faction. And here the Greens rejoin the story, in the form of Otto Hightower, Hand of the King, delivering the peace terms of his family. This scene is a replay of a similar one in episode 2, The Rogue Prince, where Daemon was defying King's Landing and his brother's instructions, and Otto was again the envoy from the capital. On that occasion, negotiating the return of a dragon egg. Rhaenyra was also present the last time this confrontation happened, being the decisive factor in Daemon agreeing to return the dragon egg. This time she arrives the same way, on her dragon, landing on the lower end of the bridge and walking up through Otto's guards to meet Daemon. Otto, of course, doesn't really want peace, at least not on the terms that he's bringing. Last episode, Alicent won some temporary influence over King's Landing by capturing her eldest son and therefore being able to influence the early direction of the new kingship. This includes making peace with her childhood friend, rather than, as Daemon feared, assassinating her, which was Otto's preference. So the Greens offer terms. Rhaenyra can keep Dragonstone, and Jace can have it after her. Lucerys will keep Driftmark, as per the existing arrangement confirmed by Viserys. These conditions seem very generous, and I'd suggest that these particular parts were Alicent's ideas. Daemon's sons, however, the children he has with Rhaenyra, are to be servants to the new king in King's Landing, hostages, effectively, to the compliant behaviour of the rest of the Black faction. I'd suggest this part was Otto's idea, or who knows, maybe Criston Cole's, or maybe Aemond's. At least it's something that Otto would suggest, something he would philosophically agree with. Daemon reacts very badly to this idea, and negotiations break down. Or well, don't break down, they don't even really start, as Daemon finds this part so unacceptable. I think this is believable because, let's be honest, Otto doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want to negotiate. He wants fire and blood, I guess, like Daemon does. Otto falls into bragging and contempt. First, he talks about the public relations coup, the coronation in the Dragon Pit, the crown of Aegon the Conqueror, the possession of King's Landing, the Iron Throne, his grandson anointed by the faith of the Seven. His frustration, his malice burst out of him. The Greens have already reached out to families like the Starks and the Baratheons. Rhaenyra has stale oaths. And ultimately, Otto says, she's just a woman. A son is a game changer, he suggests. Rhaenyra and her father were the last people in Westeros to understand that. This kind of confirms everything that Daemon has ever said about Otto. He's been plotting all along. He's been planning. He's been standing at Viserys' side for decades, advising him, whispering in his ear, listening to Viserys call him a friend. And all the time he's just been waiting for his death. We as viewers know this. We know what Otto's plan has always been. We've even seen that his family has been pushing him into it to some extent. Seeing the facade fall away, it's almost visibly a relief for Otto, like he doesn't have to pretend anymore about how he feels towards Rhaenyra's claim on the throne. She's also furious, calling him a traitor and snatching the handpin from his clothes. Otto has one final manipulation, the page from 10,000 Ships that Rhaenyra ripped out of the book and gave to Alicent back in the first episode. Rhaenyra promises that she'll give her answer to Otto tomorrow, and she and her council go back into the castle to discuss what they'll do next. Here, the philosophical differences between Rhaenyra and Daemon come fully to the fore. If I had to sum it up, I would say that on balance, Rhaenyra sees things through more of a Westerosi lens. She's more invested in the current system as it actually stands. She's presented, in the TV show at least, as having a responsibility to the population of Westeros. She shouldn't just burn the country with dragons to get what she wants. She sort of considers herself Westerosi, I guess. I don't think Daemon would describe himself as Westerosi, as actually belonging to the continent in any real sense. Daemon is much more of a Targaryen, a Valyrian. It's like he has an outsider perspective that concentrates on the rights of the monarch, of the family, at least as much as on the responsibilities. I don't mean to suggest that he's entirely self-centred and has no concept of the responsibilities. He's very much all about the dragons. We see him later in the episode singing a song to Vermithor, one of the unclaimed dragons that he mentioned. It's a beautiful scene. Vermithor so huge that the only comparisons to talk about are probably buildings. He's preparing the dragon for a new rider, and it's clear that he's personally very invested in this. I love how we see Daemon reflected in the dragon's eyes, and the dragon reflected in Daemon's eyes, to suggest that there's some kind of psychological bond going on there. at least in the sense that dragons are a huge part of Targaryen identity, perhaps the fundamental part as far as Daemon is concerned. The argument between the two of them gets so bad that Rhaenyra asks everyone else to leave so they can continue discussing it in private. Rhaenyra wants to remind Daemon of the Targaryen's guiding principle, the Song of Ice and Fire. This makes Daemon angry to the point where he physically attacks his wife. And she realises that he doesn't know about the prophecy. He knows his brother had some interest in dreams, in omens' importance, but ultimately Viserys never trusted him enough to give him any of the details, leaving Daemon to develop the idea that dragons, not dreams, are the basis of Targaryen philosophy. Humiliated, he lets her go and walks away. Next, we're treated to the return of Corlys Velaryon. After reconciling, he and Rhaenys decide that they're going to go with Team Black, with Rhaenys impressed by Rhaenyra's restraint and desire to not just burn everything down to claim her birthright. This is a huge win for the Blacks. With the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea under their control, trade to King's Landing can be strangled, and the Velaryon fleet can be added to the military forces, the dragons, the Riverlands army that Daemon wants to use to surround the capital. With the plan agreed, it's time for the Blacks to get the right alliances in place and get the armies on the march. Jace suggests that he should be one of the diplomatic envoys. His mother agrees. Jace will visit the Eyrie to secure the support of the Arryns and then move on to Winterfell to confirm the oath of the Starks. His younger brother Luke will go to Storm's End and get the Baratheons on side, which Rhaenyra and everyone else expects will be an easy task. And here I will loop back to the beginning of the episode. A short scene around the painted table. Luke is in line to inherit Driftmark after Corlys dies, and at this point it's still an open question how long that will be. Luke's extremely nervous about this prospect. He doesn't really like ships or the sea. He gets seasick really easily, and Rhaenyra assures him that she will offer help and support when he inherits. Luke is a big contrast to his older brother Jace, who is eager and hard-working, almost like a puppy in some ways. Of course, Luke is the second son. He has to play a part for his family, and if Jace is a diplomat right now, then Luke must be as well. So he flies off to Storm's End on his dragon and quickly discovers that things aren't going to be as easy as his mother and everyone else expected. There's a huge rainstorm, and in one of the flashes of lightning, he sees the monstrous outline of Vhagar over in the distance. Things get worse once he gets inside. Boros Baratheon is not particularly happy to see him, has already reached an agreement. Storm's End will support the Greens in return for Aemond marrying one of the Baratheon daughters. Luke, on the other hand, is forced to admit that he comes with nothing specific to offer. Basically, he's just turning up and expecting to reaffirm the existing oath. He's arrived too late. Earlier in the episode, when Rhaenyra was in labour, she wanted to put everything on hold until she was done with childbirth. Daemon was eager to plan and put those plans into action. It looks like Daemon was right. Things are only going to get worse for Luke. Aemond sees an opportunity to take revenge for the loss of his eye. Back on Driftmark, on the night he bonded with Vhagar, Boros Baratheon, despite allying himself with the Greens, refuses to allow this revenge in his own castle. Luke gets escorted out, back into the rainstorm, and has to try and escape as best he can, which does not work out. Vhagar is the largest dragon in the world, and Arrax looks just about big enough to fly. What's really interesting about this sequence is the extent to which, when the shit really hits the fan, neither of them is really in control of their dragon. Arrax, despite his small size, decides to take on Vhagar. Aemond wants to use his dragon to tease and terrify Luke as much as possible, but Vhagar doesn't understand this, or maybe does understand it and just doesn't care, ends up making a meal of both Lucerys and his dragon. It's clear from the look on Aemon's face that this was not his intention, and the final shot of the season is Rhaenyra receiving the news of the death of her second son. And that is Season 1, Episode 10 of House of the Dragon, and the end of Season 1 itself. Rhaenyra has tried to be restrained, has tried not to start the war too quickly, but hotter heads have allowed things to get out of hand. I've really enjoyed the character work in this episode, particularly how it's explored the philosophical differences between Daemon and Rhaenyra. Thanks for watching.